Is it wrong to have doubts about God? The psalmists questioned God about the unfairness of life. They arrived at their answers based on observation of God's creation and his self-revelation in word and deed. They believed the evidence. Is there anything wrong with questioning what we have been taught to believe about God and Christianity? If it is true, will it stand up to scrutiny? Should we look to the evidence? Or should we let our feelings and cultural pressures apart from the Bible be the gauge for determining what is Christian and what is not? Thank you for joining our discussion about the deconstruction of Christianity.
And welcome to the deconstruction of Christianity discussion. We're so glad that you chose to be with us this evening. And the troops have all arrived, but they're not in Rivendell, so I don't
No.
Really...
Across several cities and states.
So anyway, that's good, and we have some new people as well tonight, which is kind of fun. It's a growing group. So now, if any of you have read the book already on this chapter, what are your initial impressions?
Wow.
It's sad.
Yeah. This chapter's pretty harsh.
Okay, sad. Why sad?
You know, like what Don Williams said, and I tried to express this last week too, those who deconstruct, because they haven't read the Bible in context, they set up straw men. And it's really sad that they're basing these decisions off of a really bad understanding of the Bible. I mean, it's such a huge decision. And you should at least know for sure what it is you're deconstructing from.
Yeah.
And also, I would say the church not stepping up to what it should be like.
Yeah.
That really stings, and it's hard not to throw stones, because we're sinners and we should be compassionate towards one another, but at the same time, it starts with the church, and you're held to a higher standard, so behave the right way. That's a harsh reality to deal with. So.
Right.
For me, reading the chapter, a lot, I've noticed a recurring theme was a lot of it was just abuses in the church, just people not, Christianing, I guess. But the sad thing is, as someone who has left churches, I get it, because a lot of the churches nowadays they suck, they say one thing and then do the other thing, so you can honestly kind of understand where these people are coming from.
Yeah.
And if their view of the Bible is completely wrong.
So it's complex.
Very.
And who else was someone going to say?
I was just going to say that it's just very, very like you said, complex. But the thing is that I'm thinking about it from the church's angle. It's just these people don't really. To me, it seems, or by my experience as well, I've known a lot of people who've never really gotten the solid foundation. It's always been like one of these things that's like a movable floor. They're never really quite got the solidness that they needed to in order to at least say, if you have questions like Alyssa did, but at least she had I'm sure she kind of had a foundation. I did too. I mean, I had a time 40 years ago, and God had to kind of show me and say, well, do you really believe or not? And what's comes a time to make a decision here, like a real solid one. And so, and when it talks about the different grounds where the sower throws the seed, and it's very interesting there. So I've seen a lot of that. So I just think that the church is people in Colorado were saying the church has made a really bad job of it as well.
Well, there's a few things, and Don, Don has been around more than 14 weeks, so he has some ideas about how people, believers and non-believers, kind of act and think, and So in some ways, it's too easy to say the church didn't do their job. Now, part of that's true.
Right.
Mhm.
It is easy to say those who are deconstructing are having these issues. Well, that's also easy to say and true because guess what? We all have issues,
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
right?
Mhm.
They're just different issues.
Exactly.
Mhm.
It's also easy to say, well, the world system is tempting us to come away and giving us reasons to not believe, and that's true.
It's always
So,
been true.
right. So we've kind of described as we live in a sinful world with sinful people that do sinful things and make sinful decisions.
Hmm.
Now, we don't want to hear that. And those who are deconstructing really don't want to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's part of it. That is a big part of it, in my opinion.
Hmm.
We can't look at any time in history from right after creation until this day where we had a perfect human condition.
Hmm.
Uh,
Right.
as Alyssa and um,
Tim.
pardon,
Tim.
Tim pointed out right in the very beginning, Eve and Adam deconstructed like right away,
Mhm.
right?
Sure. Yep.
So this is totally not new stuff. However, it feels new to us because the parents, especially that are in the middle of this, worked hard to try to protect their kids from
Hmm.
wandering away. And yet,
Right.
they see them doing exactly that. Sometimes it's because they hold on too hard, because there's a fear they may wander away from the faith. You know what?
Mhm.
They might.
Right.
And holding on to them too hard doesn't prevent that. It could speed it up even.
Right.
Mhm.
Exasperate.
So they have to, like I did as an agnostic atheist, had to find my way in, except God is the one who calls us and gives us the information and leads us away, and then we follow that. So I liked how she started this section off. If deconstruction is the explosion, in other words, that is the
Hmm.
effect, the end
The
result
effect.
of what's going on here,
Hmm.
then the crisis is the burning fuse that detonates it.
Hmm.
Mhm.
I think that's really well put. We see them deconstructing, but we don't necessarily know what the crisis was
Mhm.
that brought this on, what brought them to this point.
Mhm.
Right.
And I would suggest one of the things that we don't do well as a church is prepare people to live in crisis.
Mhm.
Yep.
We don't prepare people to live in crisis. And I think biblically we need to do that. I as some of you know, I've hung around with a lot of Jewish people. I love hanging around with Jewish people, and they have something called life cycle,
Mhm.
where they start them from very young, teaching them what life is going to be like, including death. They deal with death. What's going to happen
Right.
after death? Well, you're going to have a year of mourning, and here's what that's going to look like. And there's a whole process they have set up for that. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't hurt. It does mean that they're prepared for what's going to happen
Mhm.
more than most of our churches prepare people.
Hmm.
I
Interesting.
think
Yeah,
the
it's very
church uses a
interesting.
lot of flowery type language when they're like, "Oh yes, you're a Christian." Oh, they make it sound like once you become a Christian, it's gonna be all great and it's gonna be like this giant burden lift your chest. And while I think that might be true for some people's experiences, I feel like for most of us that just doesn't happen. It's just like, okay, well, I accepted Christ.
Well,
It doesn't super feel like much has changed. I still have to work my 9 to 5.
I also think though that the church does try to answer, tries to teach people how to live in crisis, but they go about it the wrong way. In the sense that
Good point.
it becomes about navel gazing and psychology and understanding yourself
Right.
rather than understanding the Word of God.
Right.
Very interesting. Yeah. Usually not
Right.
very Bible centric, I would say.
Right. Right. And
Exactly.
it's more seeker sensitive, and then you get into Richard Rohr, and then you get into deconstruction because you can only navel gaze so much.
Eventually, the navel disappears.
They also
And you can start a new naval base where you can all get
Oh,
into
yeah. Yeah,
naval
you start,
gaze.
Unfortunately.
ships start coming in. Yeah.
Well, this is important, and because the studies we've been doing with Don, especially Don W, has focused on one central character throughout everything we have done,
Mhm.
which is that it points us to Christ.
Right.
And we're just finishing up in our church the 95 thesis,
Wow.
and everyone that's been in the group has been kind of profoundly impacted as it keeps coming back to, what does we do this for? It's for Christ. Why are we doing this? It's for Christ. Why are we evangelizing? It's for Christ. It's not for me. It's in some ways it's not even for the one who's going to be saved. They benefit from it, but
Right.
it's for Christ.
Right.
And we forget that and make ourselves somehow the center of attraction in this spiritual play that we're in. And that's a dangerous thing. So
Right.
if our youth that grow up into young adults are kind of trained in that way, then when crisis happens, which is what we're talking about here, they have no tools
Hmm.
to cope with it even.
Right. Right.
So it sets off on disillusionment, and we'll talk about, they've got several of these issues. The blog, oddly enough, this week is going to be talking a little bit about some of this because of some ways the Bible is misused. And we use Tevye in the beginning. I love Tevye because Tevye is always talking about about what the good book says, and you find that either that isn't what the good book says, or it is applied to the wrong person in his. And I go, okay, that really is something that we see happening a lot. People spouting something off as biblical that either isn't biblical. God helps those who helps themselves is
Right.
clearly not biblical. Right? In fact, the Bible helps us because we can't help
Help
ourselves.
ourselves. That's where the opposite. Yeah.
Right. And that applies to everybody.
Everybody.
Right. So you have that extreme.
Yeah.
Or misquotes. And that happens a lot too.
Mhm.
Things like money is the root of all evil. Well, that's close, but that's not really what it says.
The love of money.
The love of money, right. There's something really central to the discussion that's missing in that
Mhm.
biblical quote.
Or they'll
yeah.
take like a fragment of the verse and then leave out every
one part of it.
Right.
Yeah. Sure.
Right. That's right. Hello, Patrick. I'm going to have to say it verbally because I don't have time to type tonight. So they go on to say that you have two people in the same circumstance with different outcomes. You have
Right.
two brothers, brother and sister, two sisters, whatever. You have two people growing up in the same home, same parents, same house, same neighborhood, same school systems. One seems to fare well, the other one seems to not fare well. Well, their personalities certainly factor into that equation. But you have two different outcomes. And then they want us to talk about, and I think it's important, what are some possible reasons for different reactions? Part of it is, which is not really discussed here, is just our personality.
Yeah.
Because we respond to different things because the same thing in different ways.
Right.
Right. So some people, for example, are a little shy. a little more hold back, and maybe a little more fearful,
Reserved.
reserved, or fearful, or both.
Yeah.
And others, see, I'm kind of shy and reserved. I know you can't tell that because I put on a good front.
He's like, what? Say what?
I have a person that I just like to engage people. I like to talk to them. I find people fascinating, and so when I have life troubles, and I have them like everyone else does, for me, the angst is short lived. Or if I get angry about something, it doesn't last long. So I have this little thing that Joy used to tell people when this would happen. The best thing to do is just to kind of leave me alone. And when he starts whistling a tune, you'll know everything's over.
It's back to normal.
Because I just kind of start humming or whistling or something.
Right.
And I jolly myself out of it because whatever it is, it probably wasn't all that important anyway. But some of these crisis situations feel life and death
Right.
because they have to serve it. And they laid out a thing about earthquakes, and I thought that was an interesting way to do that. And how that, like in California or Florida, both, they have particular kinds of construction, earthquake, hurricane
Yeah.
construction.
Right.
And it doesn't promise to prevent all damage from occurring, but what it does, the way they do construction today in those areas, is it limits the damage
Yes.
so that the home survives.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really important, I think, thing to grasp here. Because then it asks the question, and I don't know, Don, if maybe you have some suggestions we can kind of throw around. How is it that Christian families and churches could go about creating a sort of earthquake spiritual construction? So that, yes, you might be shaken, but it doesn't mean you're going to crumble and be crushed.
I think it all goes back to discipleship. Jesus, in the Great Commission, when he tells us to make disciples, he tells us to go into all the world, make disciples of every nation, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always to the end of the earth. So, to learn to obey everything that Jesus has commanded us, and if we include through his apostles, that's pretty much the whole New Testament, it's a lifelong commitment that you're learning a way of life. And it's a way of life that when you get into the whole thing, it is the whole counsel of God applied to the whole of life. And so there's material there that's going to be applicable whether you are dealing with a sickness, the death of a loved one, an accident, a war, attack, robbery, things that friends that go into other lifestyles. If you reduce the whole Christian life to what happens at an altar call, and this is kind of the way they did church when I was growing up. It's like there's this four big things: you get saved, you get baptized, you join the church, and you rededicate your life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and by the time you can only do the first three once, and so you rededicated your life however many times you needed to. It's like everything that didn't directly contribute to one of those things wasn't part of the teaching, certainly wasn't part of the preaching, because everything is to get people down to the front for the altar call.
Right.
And those are the 4 things you can do at the altar call. So you're not discipling people. You're not
Right.
teaching them the whole counsel of God from the whole Bible applied to the whole of life. And if you're doing that, when things happen, you're going to have biblical truth that relates to those things that you've already learned. You need to be fortifying yourself with the truth before the crisis happens, because it's too late.
Right.
You know, when the thing goes wrong that makes you question, it's like you're supposed to be doing this every day.
Right.
So discipleship, we bring people to a point of commitment where they're committed to the Trinity, and they're willing to publicly demonstrate that by uniting themselves to the church, which is what baptism is supposed to do. You're identifying yourself with Christ and his people. And then you start this lifelong process of discipleship, which is learning not a decision that you make and then you go on and live your life pretty much the same as you did before, only a little bit less immorally. No, it's a life spent learning a life. And you've got to have that mentality from the pastor down to the elders, the Sunday school teachers, all the way down to the bottom.
Yeah.
And people will take things in stride if that's the Christian life they are living. And if otherwise, they may or may not.
Can I add that? Just following what Dr. Williams is saying and how important discipleship is, and going from there as a parent and as a daughter, within a family that has very interesting beliefs, learning not to freak out about other people's point of views, a no flinch rule of sorts, where, you know, inwardly you may be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're going there. But if you show it, that the house is going to come crumbling down even faster. You really have to hold it together, be grounded in the truth, and don't be afraid of what's going on. Don't let them see what maybe you're fearful that they might completely walk away. But if you show that, they're going to not come to you with questions. You know, they may see you as an unsafe source of information or an unsafe relationship or whatever. So it's maybe one way to build a better earthquake-proof house.
Well, right. I think that's important. And there's things we can add to that maybe clarify stuff that should be in the whole discipleship aspect. Here's an example. Biblical history. We don't really think about that as a way of stabilizing the faith. But when we get into life problems, we can look and see, this is to me, this is important, at least, how God worked in the lives of others who were in crisis.
Exactly.
Not necessarily the outcome, but how God worked in their life and what was the result of that. And that's what Hebrews 11 tells us about. It doesn't mean that the life was pretty necessarily or easy, but that God was clearly walking linked with them in crisis areas, and he took care of that. And I can't tell you how many times Joy and I have looked back on that. You know, like I said, I'm over 45 now, so I have some experience of a variety of crises we've had in our life that very early on terrified me. Later on were difficult, but not terrifying, because I could look back on how God worked in the lives of godly people in Scripture in the past, and how he worked in our lives in the present, so that we had a reasonable expectation that regardless of the outcome, he was still walking with us.
Yes.
So history becomes a really important thing. Understanding context, we're kind of kicking that around earlier.
Mm-hmm.
How many times I have someone call me just in a panic over a passage that someone asked them about, and then I say, okay, a text without a context is a pretext. Okay, you got
Mm-hmm.
that. Now, what's the context? Uh, and they'll pick it up and they'll look at 2 verses around. I say, okay, that's a start, but maybe you got to go back farther in the text. I had one that they called me about something in Matthew 7, and he said, "Now I looked at these passages, right in that chapter, but I still don't quite get it." And I said, "Just because you're not starting in the right place." He goes, "What do you mean?" I started the context. I go, "No, the context of Matthew 7 starts in Matthew 5."
Yep.
Really? I said, "Yes." Think about this. It's a Jewish book. It didn't have chapters. It didn't have verse numbers. It just had a lot of letters on a document.
Right.
So you've read through the idea, you picked up the next idea, you followed the flow of the context. So my advice to you is forget about the chapters and verses, just read the text.
So I got a
Yes.
question about what Don said earlier. I wanted to ask you, Dr. Williams, you said that we need to fortify ourselves in the truth before the crisis,
Yeah.
these times
Hits us.
come. So
Right.
for you personally, because the Bible's a big book, there's a lot of truths in there. But for you, where have you landed when you find yourself in crisis? What truths do you go to, like the top 2 or 3 truths that you find yourself relying on in crisis moments?
Jesus knew what he was talking about. His apostles knew what they were talking about. And because Jesus was the Son of God, incarnate in human flesh, he didn't cheat in living a full human life. He never used his miraculous powers to make his life easier. He wouldn't turn the stones into bread when he'd been fasting for 40 days. No. So it's all, it sounds like a cliche because the way things get to be cliches is they're so true that they keep being repeated. And then we turn them into cliches and we forget the actual truth. But Jesus was fully God, fully man, and he lived a full human life that was way tougher than mine. And when he talked about trusting the Father, he knew what he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that stuff is true, and you can depend on it because it all goes back to who he was. So if I'm worried about where my next meal's coming from, and Jesus said, "Hey, your Father feeds the birds of the air; He's going to take care of you."
Exactly.
It's like, okay, I can either worry that that's not actually true, or somehow I'm an exception to it, or I can actually believe it. And what's going to happen? I mean, what did happen was when I was facing that particular problem, we had moved to town. We moved to Athens, Georgia, where I was working on my doctorate, and we had gotten through. I'd gotten through seminary, putting myself through without incurring any more debt. I didn't have any debt, but I didn't have any money either. And so you get a job, and you're not going to get paid for another 2 weeks, and you got to feed your family in that time. How's that going to happen? And some guy from the church that I hadn't even shared the need with shows up out of the blue, hands me $20, and said, "The Lord told me to give you this."
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. That was going to happen because God had planned to do that because He knew it was a need. And I could have worried a whole lot less about it if I'd have just believed that Jesus knew what He was talking about when He told me these things. So, if you want, if you want one truth, it goes right back to what Don said. I've been harping on the whole time, and that is, it goes back to who Jesus was,
Yeah.
who
Right.
Jesus is,
Right.
Yes.
Right.
and you either trust Him or you don't.
Yeah.
So now it's hard to trust. We have to walk by faith and not by sight,
Mm-hmm.
and we're constituted so that we kind of need at least a certain amount of sight, to function. It's hard to trust, and so I'm on this process of learning to do it. Okay, so 50 years later, I'm still reading those same verses, and I'm saying, yeah, I kind of proved that this was true,
Becomes a reality.
and I worry a little bit less now than I used to,
Right.
but I still, I still struggle with it. But it's not a crisis now because I've been around that thing a couple of times.
Right. So
And
so back to where they're in Reconstruction with this kind of a thing here. They're starting on that journey, and so how they are guided by those around them can either make or break. Allow them to ask questions, train them in advance, as you had said earlier, uh, in the art of asking questions. They can do that as kids. We did that with our with my kids. We did that with our grandkids. We encouraged questions. I
Yeah.
love when young kids would come up and say, why is there air? I mean, things that we kind of look at and go, oh, those are kind of stuff I don't know. And it doesn't matter. Let them ask questions.
Right.
Marvel at the world around them and realize that it's safe to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And in asking, they will find answers. That's important stuff.
the other thing about discipleship is, I mean, uh, you're learning to ask the questions, you're learning to get the answers, you're learning, you're building scripture into your life. You're doing it with an older Christian, older in the faith, if not physically older. You're doing it with an older Christian who's been around the block, and he not only can help you and guide you to understand the scriptures accurately, but he's had the experience of doubting and then having God come through. If you're young in the faith, even if you've been a Christian for years, you've never made any progress. They're like, this stuff is hitting you for the first time. You need to know other Christians who've been there,
Right.
and they can not only tell you, here's what the Bible says, but here's how God has kept His promises.
To me.
Don Veinot was mentioning biblical history, and you add to that church history. You get to Acts 29, Acts 30, Acts 31, Acts 173, whatever chapter we're in. We're not the first people who've gone through this.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is coming together in the discipleship process as somebody who's more mature in the faith lives it in front of you.
Yeah.
The Star Wars prequels were not nearly as great as the original trilogy. One thing they did was in the relationship between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn. They showed you what discipleship looks like.
Mhm.
Qui-Gon Jinn teaching Obi-Wan how to be a Jedi. And of course, he's teaching him to be a heretical thing because he's part of religion.
Of course.
But watch those movies and watch how he does it, because that's a disciple-master relationship, the way it's supposed to work. And it's a beautiful portrait of it. That
Right.
you know, as
So-
Christians, that's supposed to be what we're all about.
All right, we're gonna move on now because we're gonna talk about the things that the fuses that are detonating a little bit.
Mm.
Suffering was the first one they brought up.
Mhm.
What do you do with suffering? And they pointed out that doubt drives you in one of two directions. Either puts you to run away from God or pushes you to run toward God.
Mhm.
I think that's pretty true.
Yeah.
Suffering is a powerful deterrent in life because it could become so crushing.
Right.
Years ago, when I was younger, I was in business. I loved being in business. I was pretty good at it, and economy hit a bad spot, as economies tend to do. And I wasn't prepared for it. I was a young believer, and I wasn't prepared for this crushing to me blow of losing my business.
Mhm.
And we had a carpenter, older carpenter. He was old when I was born, I think. Oscar Johnson. Oscar and Nanny. Nanny was, I don't know, 4'10", maybe 85 pounds, and Oscar, and they had a son, David, who would never have more than a 6-month-old mentality.
Uh-huh.
And they kept him at home and cared for him and took him to church and had him in a chair, a rocking chair in the back of the church, and
Mhm.
everyone in the church learned to love David because they loved Oscar and Nanny. And my business was going down, and I went and I sat with him, and I was so broken about this, and I said, God wouldn't let me lose the business, would he? And he looked at me and he kind of smiled a little bit. He goes, he might. I was looking for the miracle. God is going to reach out from heaven. He's going to
Yeah.
give you a $1 billion contract, and you're going. No, he didn't say it. I said he might.
Yeah.
And then he really directed me to the most important question in the entire discussion: is, do you trust God?
That's.
I didn't know if I trusted God. Everything that I had invested myself in was being taken away, and I wasn't happy about it, and it was hurting my family life, was hurting a lot of things. But it was a time I had to go through as a young man to recognize that those things are not nearly as important as my relationship with God, with my wife, and with my kids. And
Mhm.
for me, it took God taking that, allowing, I'm not saying he took it away from me, but at least allowing me to lose my business because it had interfered with the most important things in my life. So
Mhm.
it's a scary thing. Now, the Apostle Paul, I was working on this today, and it was really profound as we were working on this in the blog. He speaks of this kind of thing several times in his life throughout the scriptures. And he says this in 2 Corinthians 1:8 and 9. We do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia, for we were so utterly burdened. Think, this is the Apostle Paul. He's not saying life was inconvenient. He said, we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself.
Mm.
You think of the Apostle Paul and you go, despaired of life itself. I can't imagine that.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, he had visions. He talked directly with Jesus, and
Yeah.
we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. And I'm going, I know what that feels like.
Mhm.
And so did he. And then he goes on to say, But that was to make us rely not on ourselves.
But,
Here, Don's going to smile because this is what he keeps telling everybody. Not, but on God who raises the dead.
ah,
Right?
bingo.
Bingo. Can God take care of you in difficult times?
Yes.
Well, he raised people from the dead. Yeah, I think he could do that.
Mhm.
I'm struggling in my marriage. Well, God can, yeah, God raises the dead. So if he raises the dead, he can do that. He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again. In other words, this is going back to that history that I was talking about before.
Mhm.
He did it before, he raised him from the dead. He did it again, and he can do it again in the future for us. Now, these things need to be not just intellectual pursuits in church or Sunday school. This almost needs to be, I don't know, communicated in an emotionally struggling way with someone who's struggling because they are. Where are they going to turn when they leave the faith?
That's the scary part.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is something that, again, back to the discipleship, back to the earthquake proofing of your life. Because if you don't have the faith integrated in everything you're doing, when you do struggle, and you will struggle, like
Yeah.
Paul did, you will have these questions pop up where you feel like you're going to despair of life itself. When we're done, you might want to go look at that again. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, 8 through 10. It's pretty powerful because right in the middle of that, he says that Christ, that God who raises the dead. That's sort of the center of that whole statement there.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing that comes up that causes the deconstruction, or not causes, but kind of aids in it, it is what goes on fire is doubt. Is it wrong
Yeah.
to have doubt?
No, not necessarily.
It's human to have doubt.
Is it wrong to talk to your pastor or the church about having doubt?
No, if you have doubt, you probably should, or someone else who you trust.
Yeah, yeah, and it's an important aspect again because you need to have these discussions in advance of the earthquake, not when they're occurring, because when they're occurring, you're doing all you can to kind of get the kids under the couch so that they don't get crushed when the house falls down on them.
I think it depends. I think it depends on the type of doubt that you're having, because you can sincerely have doubts with like holding things with an open hand, really searching for the truth, or you can flat out be doubting out of bitterness, leaning more towards something that would justify or affirm your bitterness. And so I think that doubt might be wrong because it's coming from a place that is already, you already have the intent to maybe leave. You're looking for the push to go, right?
Mm-hmm. The final straw.
Something to validate your sin. And
The last straw.
I think it's more complicated than just saying doubt is okay. I think it depends on what type of doubt it is.
Okay, is it the question? No, this is just a question. Is it a question of a different kind of a doubt, or a question of a predilection to not want to believe and you're using it as an excuse not to believe versus having doubt?
Right. That's a better way of saying what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think there's a different. In fact, we're going to have Don go to Psalm 13. I love David's Psalms because we see him do this from time to time, where he starts out the Psalm going, life is like totally unfair, God. What's the deal?
What's going on?
And then you watch him make this transition as he's going through this, as he comes to remember something really important. Now, it isn't exactly the same as God who raised Jesus from the dead, or who raises the dead, but it is something akin to that. You want to read Psalm 13?
Yeah, this is from the New American Standard, a Psalm of David for the choir director. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart all the day? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Enlighten my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him. And my adversaries will rejoice when I am shaken. But I have trusted in your loving kindness. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, because he has dealt bountifully with me.
Yeah. Now, Patrick Haig made a comment here that we're fighting the temptation to doubt, and I sort of think we see David do that there in this psalm. He starts out, he's doubting. Clearly, he's doubting, but he wants a reason not to doubt, I think, and so he trusts God enough to say, "I'm unhappy about this.
Yeah.
Why is this happening? Why am I suffering like this?" And so his doubt is clearly out there, but he's going to God, I think, to ask those questions, and that's his method of maybe fighting the temptation to doubt. And then as he goes through this and he talks it through with God, he completely reverses where he started from. That's powerful. There's several like that
Yeah.
in the Psalms that I like a lot.
One of my favorites is Psalm 37, where he starts off talking about the wicked and like, oh my God, these guys are, this is what you're going to do to them, and he just wants God to cut them down, and then he
Right.
compares the righteous, or somebody who's, that the steps of the man that are established, those that are blessed, but the righteous is gracious and gives. And he goes on to verse 25, and it says, I've been young and now I'm old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken or his descendants begging bread. So he comes to this conclusion. So making this contrast between the wicked and the righteous, saying that the righteous are always taken care of by God.
Right.
Renewing his mind.
Yeah.
With the word, with the truths about God, who he is, his goodness, remembering his goodness.
Yeah.
Replacing lies with truth.
Yeah.
And right thinking.
Now they talked about Ginger Duggar Volo.
Yeah.
I love Ginger and Jeremy. Worked with them a long time, and as she was what she calls disentangling the faith. She didn't deconstruct the faith; she disentangled the faith.
Right.
I think that was really, really, really a good way to do it, because she realized that many of the things that she had been taught and she believed were not true.
Right.
And they were harsh, and she was terrified of God in many ways. She came to realize how many young women had been sexually molested and abused by their fathers or by others in their churches and those kinds of things. And if they would say something, they were the ones who would be punished for it. Now, those kinds of stories cause some of this deconstruction, because to them, if that's God, I don't want any of it.
Of course.
Patrick Haig points out that doubt could be caused by feelings and emotions, and that's exactly true. Our feelings get the better of us sometimes, and that's why we need to have this connection to history. Who's God? Is he trustworthy? So that we can, kind of like David did, start out with the complaint, and then as you're talking it through, the history of your life with God, or someone else's life with God that you can observe or know historically,
Mhm.
starts entering in to bring you back to your senses.
Right.
Uh, Ginger writes in her book, Disentangling Faith from Fear, that I've spent 8 years unthreading my faith,
Yeah.
separating truth from error. It wasn't a short process; it was a
Mhm.
long process. But she had people around her that were saying, "Ask the questions. We're all for it."
Mhm.
Uh, and walked her through and looked at Gothard's teachings next to what does Scripture actually say. And so it was a process for her,
Yeah.
and others had to be patient with it.
I think this is where like the church has kind of messed up, like in the past several years. Is like unfortunately most churches do not really, they're not really interested in like answering questions, even if it means bringing someone to the faith, because either one, they don't know how to answer those questions, or two, they just don't want to take the time to. So it's kind of hard to actually find anyone who's willing to listen, which I think is why a lot of Christians end up deconstructing when they come to people with these doubts and constantly hear, just have faith or something like that. It's just like, you can tell me to just have faith as much as you want, but if you don't give me a reason why and you're not actually answering the question, I'm going to start looking elsewhere.
Unfortunately, on the internet, there's always somebody there with an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Always.
There,
Always.
there absolutely is, and unfortunately, there's not enough of us out there for them to
Right.
run into,
Mhm.
and that saddens me. But that is an important aspect. There are several that Joy and I have had to work with over the years that sometimes took several years
Mhm.
because first they had to know, can I trust you?
Right.
I was in this church setting. I had this, well-known teacher, celebrity teacher, if you will.
Mm.
Uh, and look how messed up I got. And so, why should I trust you? And I go, that's a really good question. Why don't we talk about that?
Right.
You know, Don, I was just going to interject. We're talking about questions, and that's how I came to learn the most about God and what Don Williams said earlier. So, and this is what you teach. Most of the wrong teachings center around. So maybe the two best questions that we can teach and people can ask are who Jesus is and what Jesus did, right? Because then you can come to best believe, maybe, So maybe it's kind of coming together what Don said, and everybody that's getting it wrong makes that mistake, right? Who is he and what did he do?
Yeah. Now, here's the next topic that they give us. Now, as I looked at that, I thought about it because it doesn't say this in the book, but it just occurred to me as I was reading it that it goes from a really a biblical spiritual topic to someone that is less so, that is based on the crowd that I hang around with more than anything else,
Mhm.
and that's politics.
Right.
So politics is a big area that is causing people to deconstruct. And says we would be remiss if we failed to mention the impact the 2016 election had on the deconstruction explosion. One of the dominant expressions of evangelical and deconstruction on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok can be summarized in this tweet. Quote, 80% of evangelicals supporting Donald Trump was the last straw for me. I walked out of the church and never went back. End quote.
Trump
So,
derangement syndrome.
I'm sorry?
Trump derangement syndrome.
Well.
That's
Trump derangement syndrome, yeah. It's a real thing because Trump is a sinner. I can't say it any other way. Trump is a
Mhm.
sinner.
Yeah.
But then guess what? I'm a sinner too.
So are we.
And everyone that's with us tonight is a sinner as well.
Mhm.
Some are redeemed sinners and some are not redeemed sinners, but they're sinners. So there's this idea that somehow because he's a sinner, we can't vote for him, and if we do, we are giving up our Christian card in some sense.
Right, right.
So there's that issue. The second issue is Donald Trump has no social filters.
To say the least.
It's the only way I can put it.
Right, right. To say
Now,
the least.
as
Yeah.
as it happens, Joy and I have a friend. It's a female, Donald Trump. She has no social filters. She's a loving person. She would give you anything. But she opens her mouth and whatever's there just rolls right out in front of God and everybody.
Right,
And sometimes you want to reach over and go, whack! How could you say that?
right.
It's not mean spirited. It's just was there when she opened her mouth and she couldn't stop
There's
it.
no filter.
Yeah, there's people like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is part of, that's not all, but that is part of
Part
who
of it.
Donald Trump is.
Mhm.
So the question isn't, do you vote for a sinner for president? Obviously, if you're going to vote at all, you're going to vote for a sinner. Just which
Right.
one,
Exactly.
right? And then you add to that the pile-on from certain media, which then is funneled through the social media networks,
Mhm.
that you never really get to talk about issues.
Right.
Now, however somebody wants to vote, they should vote. I think they need to make their own decisions, and I would support them to vote however they want to vote.
Mhm.
Whether I agree with it or not is
Right.
not the important. But have a reason that you are voting for them that has to do with the good of the country and how they would serve that purpose,
Mhm.
not on
Just
whether or not he is able to carry on a conversation more than 3 minutes or whether he's kind of mean spirited. It is, will he do the job and does he most or she most closely support your views of how the country should run?
Mhm.
But that
Right.
never comes out. It's
No.
always personal attacks.
Yeah.
I think one of the ways that we lost credibility with our support of Trump was not the fact that a lot of Christians supported him, but it was the way some of us did it. I mean, I ran into so many people
Right.
who couldn't vote for Trump unless they had transformed him in their own mind
Right.
to a guy with a white hat who is almost a messiah figure,
right,
Yeah.
right, right,
who could do no wrong.
right.
And if you're portraying Trump that way, credibility has left the building a long, long time ago.
Mhm.
Whether you agree with his policies or not, whether you agree with them more than his opponents or not, isn't really the problem. It's we are so immature as a movement, as people in a movement, that we can't deal with complexity. We can't say, yeah, this guy has some really serious problems, but we think it'd be better than the alternative. Now, they had to try to turn Trump into a saint,
Right.
Mhm.
and they get very offended if you don't say that he's
Agree.
perfect.
Right.
And like I said, once you go down there and somebody whose faith is a little shaky
Mhm.
and needs the church to have credibility when it opens its mouth to talk about that,
Right.
credibility left the building in 2016. And not because we were for Trump, but because of the way we felt like we had to be.
Right.
Seems to me.
Well, right. And, they had the pile-on effect where they would make things up like Christian nationalists So half of the
Mhm.
country are Christian nationalists. Well, that's not true. Uh, hypocrites. Well, that's probably true because all of us are hypocrites. So that's a problem. I don't know how to fix that. Is demonstrating moral decay. Well, our country is in meltdown in moral decay.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not sure how promoting sexual um, um, sin to be practiced on a regular basis because you're more prone to certain kinds of sin is helpful to that end,
Mhm.
as a progressive, for example, or white supremacy. I'm going, white
Mhm.
supremacy? What,
Supremacy.
pile on.
They just
So,
started adding on. Yeah. Wow.
yeah, but having said all of that, because I'm not saying you should go and vote for Trump. What I'm saying is this: you should be honest in your critique on the issues. That's number one. Number two, there's other questions I think that are more important within family structures. I had um, uh, a pastor who will remain nameless contact me because somebody in his church, uh, who's a really good church member, been there forever, and she is trying desperately to get her son, her adult son, to like Donald Trump. And and she's calling him to say, "How can I persuade him?" And he doesn't want to be involved. He says, he says, I vote, and he's politically minded, but he
Mhm.
doesn't want to be part of the church. I don't want church fights over elections. I
Mhm.
agree with that. I don't think it
Sure.
belongs in the church, right? And
Right.
so he calls me up. He goes, "What would you how would you counsel me on this one?"
Mhm.
I said, "Well, for me, it's actually easy." He goes, "Okay, how can it be easy?" I said, "It's this. Here's the question. Just one question. Do you love your son more than you love Trump,
Mhm.
or do you love Trump more than you love your son?"
Mhm.
That's the question. If you love your son more than you love Trump, you're going to give him space to disagree with you because he's not going to be president forever,
Mhm. In spite of what they say.
in spite of what they say. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So keep peace in the house where you can. This isn't an area to take a stand on. It's just not.
Right. Can I add something really quick?
Sure.
Um, when we left our first two churches, Morgan had a really hard time um, trusting trusting in God, period, because the church was just gritty, it was rough, it was bad. And she was basing her view of Jesus off of her church experiences.
Sure.
And I would say the same thing with politics. Don't base your view of Christianity on Donald Trump and what you see as being called Christian nationalism, because that is not the gospel. That is
No.
Right.
that's not a good representation of Christianity. We had a situation here in our neighborhood which was comical at first to watch, but then it got pretty ugly. We had a neighbor down the street who is he a military vet? Okay. So John is a Marine, my husband, and we're watching our neighbor, nice guy, they are Christians, and he was sticking Donald Trump stickers all over our mailbox. And it's a big
Oh,
mailbox, right?
sure.
Well, our other neighbor, she was very pregnant and did not like that. And I say pregnant because, some of the behavior was interesting. She would go out there and she would start scraping off every single Donald Trump sticker with her keys. And she would be out there just angry, just going at it. So, anyways, it got so bad. I mean, she was just angry and yelling sometimes. He would come out every day after she scraped all of them off. He would slap a whole bunch more on. And we're talking like at least 10 to 20 stickers every single day.
Wow.
So she went out and she bought the LGBTQ plus flags, a whole quart of them. And she stuck them all over her fences, the fence line,
Wow.
all around her property, everywhere. And it just was like, John was contemplating, do I go down and talk to our neighbor who's putting up the Trump stickers? Because, we know you're Christian. This is not helping the situation.
Definitely.
What message is it sending?
Trump doesn't define Jesus. If he did, we'd be screwed, and there'd be golden teas everywhere.
So it's good to have biblical morals, and sure, Trump does share. I want to be careful because I don't want to lean one way or another. Everybody has their own opinion, right? But
Sure.
Right.
don't base Christianity off of what you see about what Trump represents in a way, how the party represents him, how people who misbehave with good intentions. I mean, we're human. Try to be gracious to everybody.
Yeah, we're at an interesting place in culture. It's and I think it's scary in some ways
Hmm.
because we are. I forget the word now. We are fighting this battle as if we are in the cage with the contestants.
Mm-hmm.
We're not.
Right.
This is part of our nation and our things that we need to do, and yet we cannot take it too personally. We have to be careful. So when someone wants to make an accusation like this, my question, and I think is personally a better way to ask it to those who are going to be talking, because some are not going to be able to talk about it at all, but are those who are deconstructing. That's what we're concerned about. How do we talk to those who are deconstructing? How is it that I am a Christian nationalist? Maybe you can help me with
Right.
that, because I don't see myself that way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the comeback is usually going to be something like, well, I'm not saying you are, but okay, well, maybe Donald Trump is. I'm not saying he isn't. But my question is, why would you want to treat me badly because of your feelings about that? So now it
Mhm.
brings it back home, because what are we trying to do? We're trying to help them and work with them so we understand what their pain is in this case,
Mhm.
and how to help them walk through back to the faith.
Yeah,
Because they're our task, not Donald Trump.
exactly.
Okay, quickly, we have a couple more. Purity culture, which I have called, if some of you have read our initial article,
Mhm.
we have called the moral purity prosperity gospel.
Mm-hmm.
This
Right.
is unbelievable devastating,
Mhm.
because you have Josh Harris and his book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, who then after 20 years ago said, I'm kissing my wife goodbye, and I'm kissing my faith goodbye,
Right.
and I'm kissing Christianity goodbye,
Just
and he
spend on
kissed
kissing.
everything goodbye. And then he started, for a mere $300, $250, you can go on his website and you can get a deconstruction kit.
Yeah.
What? Wow.
He just
Yeah.
flipped the script, but used the same business model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much.
Oh my gosh.
So, and I quoted this, Josh Harris, Bill Gothard, there's a whole, what we call patriocentric movement
Mhm.
that is involved with this.
Mhm.
And Linda K. Klein, a self-described deconstruction and purity culture recovery coach, says in her nightmares, shame and PTSD-like symptoms were the result of purity culture. And she credits it with being the catalyst of her own deconstruction. I can believe that.
Mhm.
The sex education she received in her youth group included teaching girls they must remain sexless in mind and body, which led to her breakup with her high school boyfriend for fear of being named a Jezebel.
Mm-hmm.
Klein also recalls that her youth pastor was convicted of trying to seduce a 12-year-old girl. So
Mhm.
you have sexual immorality going on among the adults, and they're teaching the children something else. And in fact, this I like the term moral purity prosperity gospel better than just purity culture, because there's a promise that is
Mhm.
not unlike word faith promises.
Right.
If you live according to these standards, and you're a male, for example, you will meet and court and get permission from the father to marry this beautiful woman who will be your servant for life, She'll produce great kids. They won't get acne. They'll never rebel. You'll get a great job and a wonderful car. But
Right.
if you break the vow, your wife will get ugly, your kids will rebel, they'll get acne, and your car will break down and you lose your job.
Yeah, I heard a Reddit story on YouTube where basically it was this guy talking about like what it was like for him growing up in purity culture and getting married and blah blah blah. And basically he and his wife left the church for the reason of when they got married, they were all in purity culture. They were both virgins when they got married, and no one told them that, hey, on your wedding night, expect that things might be painful.
Might be
And
changed.
so when he found that out the hard way, it was just like, oh, okay, yeah, we're leaving now because this was stupid. And it's like, he was like, but the funny thing was, he was saying that, he's glad that he didn't, do it with anyone else before marriage. But on the other hand, he hates the church now and hates purity
Right.
culture because they didn't tell him about what would happen.
Right.
It was incredibly sad because purity culture is kind of stupid. There's some things that make sense about, but the rest is just kind of like maybe that's more for you and your partner to decide. But
Right.
that doesn't affect what the gospel says or what the gospel is. So.
Well, exactly. Or that we don't fail
Mhm.
sometimes.
I
So do I believe, does Don Williams believe? I mean, both of us are not married to each other, but married for a long time.
Thanks
and-
for pointing that out.
Yeah, well,
It's 2020.
Clarification.
Yeah.
in this day and age, it's important probably to do that.
Of course.
Exactly.
But I think I really believe the scriptures are right in how we should carry ourselves in our marriage.
Mhm.
If I'm going to honor my wife, I'm not going to go out and have sexual relations with another woman.
Right.
Now, that says nothing about whether or not they might be attractive to me. It means I have to be careful where my eyes go,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And now I
Guard
do
ourselves.
that. I do that because I love my wife. And that's an important thing. And she helps me. Every once in a while, she'll say, now just remember, by the way, women know where you're looking, so watch your eyes.
Mm.
I think
Right.
that's really good advice because men are like stupid about these things. Having said that, I think purity culture, the moral purity, prosperity gospel is more likely to drive you away from God than it is to be endearing to God.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of shame in there.
Yeah.
When I was in church, there was I grew up in the high school years where that was big. Complete with the chastity ring and everything.
Yeah.
And which I remember when I lost mine. Not that I slept with anybody, but I lost it, and I was like, "Oh no, I'm never gonna get that back." Where did I dropped? And I was like, I can't tell my mom because she's not gonna believe that I just lost it.
Fell under
But-
the bathroom tile.
Yeah, it did, and through the sink. But anyways, it's just like there is so much shame within the youth group that I was involved in. Nobody was really honest about where they were at unless they really didn't believe and they're just kind of going along, in which case
Right.
everybody knew. So
Yeah.
then where does grace come in and understanding what grace is, what the gospel really is?
Exactly. Right.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
I mean, I
Good
have
point.
seen this hurts me because these are the kinds of things I think that bring deconstruction on to people. A young lady, let's say, a teenager, has sexual relations she shouldn't have. She gets pregnant, and she goes to the place that should be helping her, which is
Mm.
her family and the church and the pastor. And the pastor forced her to go up front to make a public confession and
Oh, gosh.
repentance before the
Right.
congregation.
Right.
Mm.
Right. I've heard of those stories.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How crushing,
Mhm.
how utterly crushing is that?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
unnecessary. Yes, she should repent, no question about it. But there's a way to do that. Our job, especially with someone who's young, is to love them, care for them, because they are already in a repentant state. They don't like where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow making this a public mess like this is even worse.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's I guess they do it to shame them, just to bring shame, like say like a punishment kind of thing. I remember we used to attend a church, and both of my girls did that too. They did the purity. It was like a ceremony kind of thing
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
all the
Right.
youth people.
Right.
Yeah, and then they got rings and stuff. Yeah, so. hmm
They think
So-
they're bringing
Nobody
people to
followed it
repentance.
though. I mean,
No.
they went the opposite. We
They
heard
think they're bringing,
stories.
they think they're bringing people to like repentance, and you're not going to do it again because if we make it public, you're going to be scared to do it again. But they're scaring them into not doing something which they're probably going to do anyway.
Mhm.
That's
You know,
very legalistic. I mean,
Very,
it has
very.
intentions behind it, but it's
Yeah.
very legalistic. And
Very.
Yes.
where's understanding of the gospel?
That never stops anybody, right?
No. Mm-mm.
Right, and this isn't just the church, by the way. I met,
No.
we've had to help a lot of former Jehovah's Witnesses who,
Oh,
when they were teenage girls, went through the same kinds of things
Mhm.
and were shunned, which means a public. This is a
Mhm.
public Veinot shaming of what's
Yeah.
going on. They could come back to the congregation, but they had to sit in the back of the congregation, which means okay, you're being punished, and they couldn't
Yeah.
speak to anybody, which means okay, you're being punished because you are a really, really,
Really bad.
really sinful person,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and maybe no redemption for you.
Yeah.
This is, in my mind, a major issue in just too many churches. Yes, we need to teach moral purity. That's true.
Mhm.
But it should be because of, guess why? We love God.
Mhm.
Right.
Now,
Right.
I mentioned earlier today in our webcast, I mentioned Willow Creek, and as you know, I have some issues with Willow Creek.
Okay.
But here's something they did that I rarely have seen anywhere.
Mm.
Bill Hybels. There's a lot of things he did wrong,
Right.
but he loved God, and he painted a picture when he was giving the gospel, and sometimes he gave a really good job of it.
Mm-hmm.
You came face to face with God in a way that you rarely hear from anybody.
Mhm.
He could explain God to you in meaningful ways that you go, I want to know a God like that.
Mhm.
That's important, and it is not often done in churches. So
Mhm.
when we come to these kinds of things, we're supposed to gently correct,
Yes.
not
Yes.
abuse, and bruise. So that's one of the reasons why deconstruction is going on.
Mhm.
That, I think, can be addressed, but it has to be addressed at a church and family level.
Right.
Don't be shocked when they do something sinful, because they're sinners.
Right. Right.
Right.
Gotta love them in spite of it.
Yeah.
Last thing we're going to do is morality, toxic theology. That kind of goes with what we just talked about.
Right.
The Bible, it is an abused book in many cases,
Yep.
Yeah.
and we see it especially in the deconstruction movement, because they lift passages out of Scripture
Mm.
and kind of have it say things it didn't say.
Mm.
Judges 11 is one, and they do, I think, a pretty good job of dealing with this.
Mhm.
It talks about Jephthah, and he had made a vow before the Lord.
Mhm.
Now, here's the question. Did he sacrifice his daughter on an altar,
Mm-mm.
or did something else happen? This is where context becomes important.
Mhm.
Understanding the original languages, or at least having a way to look at that. First of all, to blame God for this is not correct, because God has already condemned child sacrifices.
Mhm.
So that's a non-starter. Leviticus 18:21, Deuteronomy 12:31, and 18:10. So he's already spoken to that issue. The
Mhm.
second thing, and this is an important one, the Hebrew word used for a burnt offering is olah. I'm probably getting it wrong. Don can correct me. Which can also mean ascent or a going up. The same word is used this way in Ezekiel 40:26. It's important to note that when translating the Bible from Hebrew to English, now some of you here, I noticed, would know something about translating from one language to another.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to kind of work with the words to get something reasonably close because there's not a one-to-one correspondence. That's
Right.
the
Mhm.
same here. Number one. Number two, words have a range of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So it could mean this or this or this. The context helps you to understand that. Uh, it's the translating from Hebrew. Context plays a significant role in determining the meaning of a word. So many scholars think that in a context where a daughter's virginity is emphasized, which is what's going on here, she's mourning her virginity. She's
Mhm.
going to be forever a virgin.
Mhm.
Jephthah must have meant he was deciding to dedicating his daughter to permanent service to God, perhaps in a tabernacle, not burning her as a sacrifice. When Jephthah's daughter realized that what her father had done, she went to the mountains to weep for her virginity. That's the story that's at play there. It isn't that her father is going to sacrifice her on an altar when she returns. It is that she's going to be perpetually virgin, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and she will be serving in a temple, most likely. So, and you could do that with many of the things that they bring out. You know, Jesus
Mm-hmm.
was not opposed to homosexuality, for example.
Yeah, he
Well,
never
we
spoke about it.
yeah we can
Or
address that.
yeah.
But you have sexual prohibitions. Jesus died for our sin. You have gender roles. They don't like any of those things. They don't like
Mhm.
sexual prohibitions. They don't like the fact that Jesus died for our sin. They don't like gender roles. Uh, and the inclusivity. They want inclusivity.
Inclusivity.
Yeah, thank you. Inclusivity
That thing.
without restriction to behavior.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. It's one of the common ones where they say, well, the woman that was caught in adultery, he
Mhm.
didn't. He pardoned her. I mean, he accepted her. Yeah, but then he told her, sin no
And no
more.
more.
Go and sin no more.
Sin no
No,
more.
they don't say that part.
Right.
Mm-mm.
Right. And that's why
So,
the biblical context is important. So all of these are the reasons that they tend to be moving toward deconstruction because they want things to be a different way than they are.
Yeah.
Say what they want them to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they think
I'd
this will
like
fix
I'd
the
like things to
problem.
be a different way than they are as well, but I learned that doesn't really happen.
No.
So
No.
all right, we are over tonight by a lot.
Wow. It was a
But
good talk.
yeah, but I think it was important.
Yes.
So everyone. Oh, and we can
Oh, there
see
we
him.
go.
Good to meet you. Glad you're here.
Yes.
Do we have any quick questions before we go? This has been hopefully productive. I know parents are grieving in this time. I know churches are trying to understand it, but it isn't. As we started out right at the beginning, it isn't the first time young our children have left the faith. It is just that now it has a new cool name, deconstructing.
Mhm.
The
Right.
difference is they have others in a forum or format, social media, that can help you and entice you to deconstruct from the faith. That's new. That part is new.
Mhm.
But I would say, and I think Don has laid it out with discipleship again, the way to um, earthquake proof your spiritual house
Mhm.
is to start early discipleship.
Mhm.
Give them the opportunity to challenge and ask questions.
Sooner the better.
It's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When my son was 15, he came to me and he says, "Okay, Dad, why should I believe the Bible's true?" And he's grown up in a house of two apologists. And I said, "Well, we'll make this easy. for me. Here's a list, and I gave him a list of like 5 prophecies that were given in the Old Testament that you could go to the library to look up and see if they happened on a secular source, and then go, oh my, it was prophesied in the Bible. Historically, it happened. I think the Bible's probably reliable.
Right.
Right. So asking questions is a good thing, and I think that's a starting point for all of them. So any other quick questions?
I just want to throw one thing in. Back when I was a young atheist, about 20 odd years ago, life would hit me with the occasional crisis, as it does with all of us, things that would drive me further from God at the time that I was dealing with them. But, as I got older, 5, 10 years later, I look back at them and realize that, thank God those things happened. Thank God I didn't get that promotion. Thank God this didn't, I ended up breaking my foot at this time. Thank God that these things happened, because had they not happened, I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't have my beautiful wife and my wonderful daughter here. I wouldn't be speaking to you. None of these things would have happened had, these things that seem like a horrible crisis at the moment. This was actually when God was looking out for me the most. And I think that's something that everybody needs to bear in mind as we hit those occasional stumbling blocks in life.
Yeah, and the years that you
Very
think
true.
that have been wasted, they're not wasted, they're still used. God redeems that time, uses it for his glory. So even when you're doubting, you could maybe speak to somebody else's doubt if that time ever comes. So
yeah, Joseph was a real he realized that in his life too when he was.
Well, I take heart with a story like the prodigal son. Because when you think about those who are deconstructing, it's a panic for the parents. It really is. And my heart goes out to them. But just because that's where they are at today doesn't mean that's where they will be 6 months or 6 years from now. The prodigal left. It was a nasty leaving. Because asking for his inheritance was basically saying, I wish you were dead. Give me my money. I'm on my way.
Yeah, out of here.
And Dad did it. And then it says, after a while, life was not all that good. And it says, and he came to himself. Well, that's the good stuff. And, my dad treats his employees good, so maybe he'll let me work for him.
Yeah.
And what he finds is as he gets there, and it's the coolest story. It says the father saw him a long way off. The dad knows his walk.
Yeah.
And he set things in motion. He's ready because my son is back. We have seen those kinds of episodes from those who had left the faith, the family strained, but years down the road, they came back. So just because we're in deconstruction today doesn't mean they will be forever. So anyway.
Thank God for that.
Well, good. And good to see you all again as always.
Yes.
There we go.
You guys
Emma,
enjoy.
and your friend's name. We're glad to have him as well.
Thank you.
And,
enjoy your time there, guys.
Yep. Have a good time. See you all later.
Adios.
Bye.
You told Emma not to disappear.